an educational series on cybersecurity, compliance, and IT governance. Produced with the support of Freedom Technologies, Phoenix's leading managed service provider.
So you'd think that December would be a quiet month. Oh, no, no, no. We never have a quiet month. Jump right into it. I think we're all going to have a fun time talking about this one. First thing, lovely backdoor account discovered in Zytel Firewalls. I don't know what to say about this. I mean, this is not the first time vendors have been caught with, putting in backdoors for various reasons. I don't know why they still do it. If you're running the firewalls, you need to go out and you need to get it updated, update the firmware, because they've got it hard coded in there. And it's hard coded so that it goes SSH right into it. So if you're running it, please update. Then we jump into our lovely thing that we'll spend, I'm sure, as was said earlier, like John said, we could probably spend, I think, more than a day. I think we could probably spend a week talking about the lovely Russian attack. And this all started, unfortunately, I was right on top of this, not because we're a user of the software, but we monitor a lot of things. This all started with Red Team. The Red Team tools at Fireeye. And, while we sat there and pondered, why would they steal the Red Team tools and why would they, go after Fireeye? That's kind of a bold statement. And I think this was, in my personal opinion, this was their statement on the way out. They had already achieved everything they wanted and they wanted to throw up a flag to say, hi, we're here. And I think they intended to be the tip of the iceberg here. So we started with our tip of the iceberg here, which was the Fireeye Red Team tools. Now, I do appreciate the response from Kevin Mandia. The excellent response. They were very open. If you guys have looked at their material, they were very open about what happened that they knew about. They immediately came out with IOCs so that we all as defenders could help defend our own environments. So I really appreciate that. It wasn't dragged on. It didn't take 6 months and them go, oh yeah, by the way. So I will give them kudos. It never, we don't ever want to be the ones that are breached, but unfortunately it's becoming far too common, but I do applaud them on their response. So as we start getting more into the details, we find out that, it wasn't just Fireeye, that it came in through Solarwinds, which we'll get into, I'm sure, in depth today. The terrifying thing about this, and I was explaining this to my seniors, is that it's supply chain. We trust, our suppliers to deliver us good information. And of course they said, well, it probably wasn't signed. And I said, no, this was code signed. So that makes it even more terrifying because now I have no way to really look for it. Looking for something that's invalid traffic that's invalid is very difficult. It's kind of like auditing. We all audit for failures, all of our networks, I guarantee you. We audit for failures. Anything that's an error, a failure, we turn on for auditing. But how many of us turn on auditing for success? And then to what degree do you turn that on? Because it can generate so much load, most of us don't turn on much of that. Well, the same thing happens when you start looking at traffic. We expect this traffic to go out, and because the attacker used command and control in the US, hey, it was valid. I'm sure somebody looked at it and said, oh, that must be, and just simply pawned it off on that. I'm pretty sure of that. So this is, to me, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is not the first time we're going to see this. Or it isn't the first time we've seen this. It's not going to be the last time. I think this is going to be what we're seeing right now is going to be, unfortunately, become as common as ransomware. Yeah. In the middle of all this, there was another very interesting leak that occurred. 2 million members of the Chinese Communist Party of China was leaked out. And what was interesting about this is it told kind of where they were, where they were working. And this, to me, boils to something we've talked about here as well, and that's the inside threat. We always talk about inside threat. Well, this could be your inside threat. Again, we all see how China is hoovering up information. I've got a couple of other articles in this month's dump of information that'll show that as well. So could this be, are these people helping to hoover up information? Don't know. I can't say that they are. I can't say that they aren't. But again, this is where you start talking about the insider threat and why, what motivates them, and are these people part of that insider, and are these people in your organization? So this, I think, is going to open a lot of people's eyes as well. Unfortunately, it hasn't to date, because the insider threat is so difficult to identify and control, remove, that I think, again, people, while we're going to see more attention towards it, people are going to continue to bury their heads in the sand. Again, now we're December 15th. SolarWinds comes out with some information that says, yeah, our Office 365 emails were compromised. Oh, and oh, by the way, fewer than 18,000 global customers were affected. And just the way they said that, I'm like, fewer than 18,000. But that's a big number. And when they started narrowing it down, 33,000 at the time that would have been using the vulnerable product. So it's fewer than 18,000, and we think it's fewer than that. That's still a huge number. And, if you're a large company, are you one of those 18,000? And people say, oh, I'm a large company and I would know immediately if I was one of those 18,000. You may not, especially in larger organizations. Do you know if your admins brought it in and were, I'm doing my air quotes here, testing it to see whether or not they, it was some software they wanted to use? And if they were, did they bring in the vulnerable version? Is there a pilot of it out there that you don't know? The larger the organization, the less likely you are to know what's going on in the little ends of the tentacles that are all over the place. So, this put a lot of fear into a lot of people. We also at this time began to start hearing about how many people, or excuse me, what organizations in the US government it continues to show up in and that are impacted by this. And I think we'll never know the true overall number, but I think it's going to continue to grow in both number of customers as well as, US government entities and other government entities. And again, we now suddenly have the, issuing the CISA issuing a emergency directive. The emergency directive, which is interesting, it basically said unplug it from the network. Again, December 15th, the attackers had a long time to be in these networks. Depending on who you believe it is and what you believe their skill set is, very likely they've already gone to ground and they've embedded themselves like a tick somewhere and gone dormant, waiting after they've gotten in. So the fact that you found it and removed it doesn't necessarily mean your environment's clean. And remember, I said we'll talk about China again. Here it is. We have a couple, husband and wife, that were selling trade secrets to People's Republic of China. In this case, it was around medical and scientific research in the medical arena. Again, China is like a Hoover vacuum. They take data from everywhere they can and whatever they can. This is just one example. There's a lot of them out there. For every one that we see prosecuted, my guess is there's probably 100 that get caught but are never prosecuted because they flee. Again, just some of my experience. Love to hear more from somebody at a government agency, although I don't know that they necessarily would disclose that, but I think that the numbers are truly terrifying. Here we are, December 18th, and Microsoft, talks about how there was at least 40 customers that they determined had been compromised in the, what is being called the SolarWinds compromise. And they started naming some of the other things, Treasury, Commerce, Health departments, Energy, State departments, and then, of course, the Nuclear Security Administration, which really caused a lot of terror in there. But what was interesting was the breakdown of those customers that they talked about. Government agencies were 18%, contractors 9%. This one is what really attracted my attention. IT companies 44%, which tells me that tells me that they are trying to bury deeper into some of the organizations. So this is something that I would be very concerned about, is why did they go after other IT companies? What are those IT companies? And it wasn't just the US, for everyone who doesn't know it yet, wasn't just the US that were targeted. We also had other countries targeted as well. We just happened to get the brunt of it, it appears. Another one, China, former Zoom China liaison was indicted for interfering with meetings. Apparently, again, at the behest of the Communist Party, they would provide information about Zoom users, the meetings, and in some cases, more details such as IP addresses, names, email addresses, and things like that for users that weren't actually in China. So again, another very interesting thing going on here. I'm not going to let you guys read it, pull up the articles and dig into it. But again, this goes back to that whole, we have a country that is very active, has been for some time, and we're seeing more bold, in some cases, display of how they're grabbing that information, to be honest, with basically no penalty. So again, something to think about there. And again, this is actually December 24th. We have another article that starts talking about how we've talked about federal agencies, we've talked about customers. This one starts talking about the fact that it also impacted state and local governments. And again, are state and local governments prepared for this type of actor to come in and attack them in this way? I don't honestly know. I would say look at your federal agencies. Your federal agencies were caught off guard. So my guess is that if the federal agencies were caught off guard, which we could have a whole discussion on that, the state and local governments are probably much, much less likely to be able to deal with this in any sort of rhyme or reason. Again, January 4th, actually, so we're now up to speed. Microsoft says the attackers viewed our source code. Now, why would they view the source code? What benefit is it to them? Why didn't they, a lot of people I talked to about this said, well, they didn't change anything. And they even said in the article here, they didn't change any of the code. They couldn't, they didn't have the rights. They just viewed it. And so a lot of people I talked to immediately said, so it's not a big deal. I said, it absolutely is a big deal. This source code is not available to me. It's within their own organization. If I get that source code, if I get a copy of that, and we've seen this in the past with Microsoft and a couple other losses of source code related to, for example, NT or Symantec lost a whole bunch of source code. What immediately happened within literally a month or two, we started seeing new exploits, and these new exploits continued for a year plus. And the reason is because the attackers now having the source code makes it a lot easier to locate, issues at hand. So just by viewing the source code, it still is a risk. Doesn't necessarily mean there's any problems there, but it can make it easier for them to determine where problems are likely. So again, that's one of the key takeaways from this. The other takeaway here is I think that the language could have been better here. As with many companies, we plan our security with an assume breach philosophy. That language caught me off guard. Yes, you have to prepare for being compromised. I think the assume breach is, maybe I'm just being picky and wordsmithing it. I think that's kind of like, yeah, we're going to get hacked, so we'll just deal with it when it comes. I don't really think that's their attitude. I think it's just poor words, but it just kind of catches my attention there.
So Eric, one of the interesting things about this is, what was the source code doing in a location that could actually be viewed, even if someone was moving laterally? That's bizarre.
So they had an interesting statement in here. They basically said that Microsoft, uses open source development practices and culturally, internally, means that it does not rely on secrecy of source code for the security of its products. Again, that kind of took me back. You know, I can understand some pieces needing, you know, everyone needs it so everyone can see access to it. But I would think that core pieces, you give people the API and you say, here's the API and here's how it works. You don't say, by the way, if you ever want to look at the source code, it's over here. That seems, again, very odd to me, but I didn't want to pick on it yet until I had time to ponder it. But since you pointed it out.
Well, I think a couple of things that need to come on into play there, Eric, are first and foremost, you know, probably a digging into how Orion and the predecessors to Orion worked, you know, and the way it's set up, where it effectively, for all intents and purposes, if set up, you know, quote correctly, air quote correctly, it's actually giving over administrative rights to watch over those particular systems from an availability and performance perspective. So in that particular case, Rich, you know, if I've got a system that has tangential admin access, guess what? You know, hey, I can just walk on into any sort of source safe, start probing that code, and away I go. And nobody's going to notice it until I exfiltrate that code in some form or fashion. Hopefully, nobody recognizes it. So I was curious, Eric, looking at your time frame? I just noticed. Were you going to talk about that Sangoma exposure?
No, I did.
The free PBX exposure, because there's an interesting aspect to that. From the standpoint of that particular attack, and the use of that software is so prevalent in certain industries, especially contact centers, you know, and you know, throughout the customer contact center environments, and it's essentially a PBX software that's free and available. Well, it's commercial software, but there's a free and available version that's that companies can download and utilize, and they also reported a particular breach of their source code.
Yeah, I didn't include it in this. I saw it. It's one of those things when I start doing the news stuff, I end up with, you know, 200 slides and.
Yep. Yeah, I know.
You know,
I know.
You got to kind of pick and choose. But yes, I did see it, and yeah, and I think that, you know, an interesting topic for a discussion one day would be, you know, why are we seeing more of these problems with source code exposure and things like that? You know, have we become lax about how we're controlling it? And, you know, what is the real risk of that?
So Eric, I'd like to throw in an idea here about why there may be a serious issue with the viewing of the source code. And I would suggest that with a company like Microsoft that really does not divulge much, if you can look at their source code, you may be able to pull things like clues, protocols, domains, just anything that could be useful for a future attack setup scenario. Even though you can't change their code, maybe you can pull enough details out of a review of their code to figure out where do you want to go sit and do some kind of attack or sculpt something because they use a particular port or they use a particular protocol, or you want to use their information to mimic what you're doing to spoof and have somebody else believe, oh, that's typical Microsoft behavior. Kind of like what they did here with, oh, that was typical Solarwinds behavior. Well, turns out it wasn't, but they sure made it look like it was.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, again, me personally, as I've told my leaders is, you know, the source code for our applications, those applications are considered what make us special. And this is true of the last 3 companies I've been in. And I said, okay, if that's the case, then you protect them because they are your lifeblood, you know, and don't say, well, it's just an application, it's just source code. Here you are telling me that's what makes you better than our competitors. Then you should treat that source code, you know, with the appropriate level. So I personally, this one is, like I said, I will probably end up ranting on it a lot over the next couple of months because I think that this is an area that gets kind of overshadowed right now.
Well, is this I mean, if you don't mind me kind of lighting the powder keg here, Eric, you know, is this an opportunity for us as an industry, or at least you tonight, just to kind of, so I can light the powder keg and sit back and watch it burn, is, you know, does this really become a turning point for us to either strongly implement DevSecOps or to completely rip DevOps out as a development infrastructure or development methodology and say, you know, this is why we don't do the things that we do in DevOps?
So it's interesting that you bring that up, because we're having that discussion right now, both among some of my peers outside of work and within work. And my personal take on it is this does not require us to, you know, DevSecOps doesn't get thrown away. It's, have we built it correctly? And one of my comments to a peer was, you know, we have chosen to involve security day one in the whole pipeline. And we were very picky about things. We made some of our ops guys go through hurdles and jump things and do tricks all over the place to make things the way that made, and I'm doing my air quotes again, the security guys happy. But those things now, they've already come back and looked at and said, you know, look, with this latest breach and things like that, we get it. We understand it now. So was it overkill? It was perceived as overkill because it's hard, you know, we tell them there's a threat and there's a risk, but unless you can point to the building burning, most people go, well, you're just hypothetical and speculating. Well,
Right.
now all of a sudden we have not a building burning, we have a city burning with this attack. So a lot of people are suddenly standing up and going, okay, wait, maybe you guys with the tinfoil hats, maybe you aren't as crazy as you think. So I think that that's one of the ways to, and it's not to beat anybody's face in it, but it's to explain, when we tell you these things, this is the potential of risk. Here it is. Now, is this a one-off? No, I don't think it is. Was this a very complex, you know, maneuver for them to do? I would say it is. Does that mean it can't happen again? Absolutely not. And, you know, we need to contain it and understand it and just ride that wave and not, in my opinion, I'm going to use it as an educational tool. We're going to continue to, you know, evolve our DevOps, what we're doing and things like that. You know, one of the angles we took on this as we were discussing it over the last couple of days was talking about containers and how developers like going, oh my God, I can go grab a container and I can start developing something immediately. All I have to do is download this container from, you know,
Right.
John or Jane Doe over here, and I'll just put it on my machine and I'll run it local. That way I don't need any resources. And we said, no, you won't, because I don't know anything about that, you know,
Yep.
and I don't know what it's going to do on your machine or if it's going to act as a gateway to anything else. And again, we've been trying to educate, because again, if you've been out there watching and reading, containers get compromised, containers get very interesting malware and other things injected into them. And you know, how many people are looking for that? And when you start looking, and this is where I kind of will raise my flag, and software vendors, I don't mind you developing and delivering your stuff in a container. I love it. But when I scan that container and I look for vulnerabilities in it, I don't expect to find vulnerabilities. You know, now if it's a 0 day, it just came out, okay, hey, you know, you're like us, you got to patch it the whole time cycle. But if it's a vulnerability from 2 years ago, I'm going to look at it and go, why is that there? And I want you to either patch it or remove it. And one of the common answers I'm getting back right now, see, you got me off on a tirade. The common answers I'm getting back right now is people going, well, that's for this piece of code, and we don't use that piece of code or library. And I say, great, remove it.
Exactly.
If you're not using it, remove it. Well, we don't want to do that, because then we have to take it out every single time, and it doesn't hurt anything to have it there. And who says we need to take it out? I'm like, well, security best practices, let me take you back 30 years.
Right.
You know?
But see, that's, I mean, to your point, that's kind of where I'm going with my question and with the match and the powder keg, is the idea that what you've described in your environment is, you know, what I would claim is a mature DevSecOps kind of process. Security by design, security is built in at the beginning. It's what we've been preaching for, you know, ad nauseum for 30 plus years. But what I've seen from a maturity perspective is that even security technology providers are out there, having ops win and having DevOps win versus including any sort of security. So to your point, this is a key element and a key opportunity for us to educate, but it's also maybe a point where we have to take a step back and say, hey, in terms of speed of design and delivery, and the opportunity to quote fail fast being included into DevOps, we also need to temper that with the idea that to your point, there has to be a pragmatism that says, we don't need that code. Why is it there?
Right. Yep. No, and I completely agree with that. And I'm going to agree 100% with you. I feel that in general, boiling it outside of my example, if you look at it in general, I think that quite honestly, the DevOps, the ops side of the house, the developer side of the house has won. Security has been pushed back. And I think that that's a bad thing. But I think that, again, now is the time to educate and say, guys, this is why we do things. And the security that we got injected in ours, and I would call ours a maturing process, okay, is because we beat the drum and, we drew a line in the sand and said, we're not going to back down. And again, I would call us a little bit unique in the sense that we drew the line in the sand, and it wasn't just myself, it was multiple teams, security teams, multiple team members from each team that lined up on that line and said, we're not going back any further. Right. And that takes a lot of, intestinal fortitude to do when you're standing against, quite honestly, the business. And I don't know how many people really have that chance. And hopefully this will give them the ammunition to basically say, look, we've got to do this. Mm-hmm. And, this is, I would call this for a lot of shops, this may be their wake-up call. Now, what really scares me is the small operations, the small and medium-sized companies where, the security guy is probably the IT guy who is also, the night guardsman and, 7 other jobs as well. Yep. Those are the environments that I'm truly terrified because we do use things from them, whether it be a service or code, libraries, APIs. If I'm a bad guy and I get in there, because I know they're going to be weaker to begin with, man, they're going to get me real easily, and it's going to be a long time till anyone notices.
Yeah, well, it comes back to what you said at the beginning, which is this is all about supply chain.
Yep.
And so the validity of the code-related supply chain becomes so paramount. But the challenge that we have is, we've had 20 plus 25 plus years worth of culture of open source perspective where the community polices itself. Arguably, we have so much code and so many different projects and so many things going on across so many different people that inevitably the community can't police itself. It seems like. Yeah, it seems
I would agree with
that's
that.
Maybe the old man on the porch moment that I have tonight, but it's like, it just feels as though we've reached that tipping point where, if organizations as maturing as yours, Erik, are using code that, maybe 6 levels removed in terms of obfuscation and could be developed by somebody, 2 Joes in a garage is the way I would call it, and who knows what they're being bought for. And they're introducing something into that code that then propagates through so many different other people. How do we police for that without an effective method? That's, maybe there are, maybe that's where it's an opportunity for this team, for this group to educate me is, are there opportunities, are there methods out there in terms of projects, frameworks, et cetera, that the community and the industry could start to rely upon and say, this is what we're going to go after, be it, compliance related frameworks. I don't want to use that term too much, but, some sort of framework that allows us to say, we're going to test against this. I don't think it's necessarily MITRE in this case, because again, this is source code related, and this is, purposely introduced, propagated maliciousness at a source code level. How do we find that sort of stuff without saying, hey, every single line of source code has to go through, appropriate testing? That's going to take forever and slow the industry down. Nobody's going to go for that.
Yep, I agree. John, did you want to jump in here?
Well, we do have the speaker, Jim Moore, ready to go.
Oh,
So
Okay.
I knew this was a hot topic and it was going to consume a lot of the conversation. Do you want to save some of the time and energy for the second presentation?
Yeah, why don't I go ahead and end the deck here so we can get him up, and we'll go from there.
Okay, very good.